Hello everyone and welcome. This is Mary Magnuson, and on behalf of the Blandin Foundation, I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar on fiber and gigabit networks. The future is here. This is one in a series of monthly webinars we're offering for our Blandin broadband communities and open to anyone with an interest in using technology to improve community. Before we begin, I'll point to the chat box on the lower left corner of your screen. To interact with us at any time during today's webinar, you can simply type your question or comment into the chat box. And now let's get started. Again, my name is Mary Magnuson. I work here at Blandin Foundation, and my job is to administer the Blandin Community Broadband Program. Joining me today is Bill Coleman of Community Technology Advisors, who I'm sure many of you know. Bill has been our Blandin Foundation's primary broadband program consultant for a number of years. Bill is going to introduce our three guest speakers today. They are Pat Sims from Lightcore Group, Steve Howard from Paul Bunyan Communications, and Aaron Deacon from KC Digital Divide. And I'll just point out that for some reason, when Aaron logged in today, he's showing up as Charlie Kwan in the presenter list up there. So that's actually really Aaron. Sorry for the confusion. And so I'll pass it off to you, Bill.
Thank you, Mary. Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for joining in. Last fall, we had our broadband conference and good success, but in the evaluations, people said, well, they were new to the broadband issue and wanted some introductions to some of the many topics that are involved in the community broadband discussion. And so this month, and then through the spring, we'll be having events trying to do that. And so this month is around gigabit networks and the use of fiber networks to achieve those speeds. Just a couple of years ago, the idea of a gigabit network to people's homes was something that when Google announced it, many telecom providers laughed at them and said, well, what are they doing and what would people do with gigabit? And while we're still trying to figure out what to do with a gigabit, the deployment of gigabit networks is a growing trend in the industry, and it just widens the gap between those communities that have quality broadband, high-speed gigabit, or either gigabit or 100 megabit tape networks, and those people are still left a 1 megabit or 3 megabit wired connection, or maybe just a cellular or other wireless network. So today we're going to talk about gigabit networks over fiber. We've got a great panel of speakers, and we're going to get going right away. Pat Sims is somebody I've known for more than 15 years. Worked together at Envoy, a regional telecom provider now known as Zayo. Pat is a technical expert, and we've talked a lot about the community engagement in broadband and how communities can get the broadband networks they need. Pat's participated in our fall broadband conference and got great reviews, so we brought him back for this webinar. Pat, why don't you go ahead and tell us about next generation broadband?
Okay, thanks, Bill. Thanks for the introduction. I call this presentation Next Generation Architecture's Readiness for the Next Generation Broadband. I think many of us have seen presentations that show some kind of next generation fiber networks, GPON, GEPON, NGPON, WDMPON, Active Ethernet AE, or even high-speed XDSL like GFAST, ADSL 2+, or VDSL. So with that, when I take a look at things, in a technical review perspective, what are some of the next generation architectures, and how are we using them? Well, for the most part, we're going to be talking about fiber. I do talk briefly about some copper, but the next generation architectures typically reside over fiber. And with that, fiber concepts are changing. And because of that, are we prepared? Have we built the fiber network? Are we behind the curve, so to speak, or we're using old fiber or old concepts or old techniques. Then start looking at some of the applications, IP applications and services. Is there anything new? You know, everybody understands what IP is, Internet Protocol. That's where we're going. Passive optical networks defined. When we looked originally, passive optical networking was a splitting configuration where we did a point to multi-point, a single fiber going to multiple residences or multiple businesses. It's not the case anymore. Passive optical networks today we're using in a point-to-point architecture or even into open access. The other components that we look at, video. Video is a very big driver, but it is also the bandwidth hog. So when you try to rely on very clean, robust video, it goes beyond IP and HDTV. The television sets are getting bigger. We all have multiple devices, smart, intelligent devices, tablets, etc. They're small in size, so the video always looks good. But when we start going to larger screen sets, TVs, we're finding that there are some constraints, and that's what these new bandwidth requirements start talking about. Can the existing networks handle it? So before I get into anything really about networks, I need you to understand some important concepts. And I typically talk the same slide throughout the industry today because it's missed on a lot of people. The design process for access solutions over fiber. And again, I'm not talking about long haul or metro fibers or anything of that nature. I'm really looking at access to that, whether it's a residence or a small business or multi-dwelling apartments, schools, etc., that require access to some network. It begins in the central office or head end and moves through the optical distribution network or the outside plant, and it typically terminates at or near the subscriber premises. Design for the serving areas are key because I may need multiple paths or redundant paths of fiber to satisfy service level agreements with like wireless backhaul or even banks or other businesses that are requiring a more robust redundant circuit. The second concept today that I want you to be able to understand is the current generation of access electronics is estimated to have a life cycle of 3 to 5 years. When we talk to many people in the industry, we know that we have 100 megabits today with a lot of systems, but the path is ultimately to get to 1 gigabit tomorrow, and we're going to see a great deal of this coming out with the gigabit nations. And when you talk about some of the municipalities that have been out there, EPB is the Electric Power Board of Chattanooga. They've advertised their gigabit nation. Google is pushing their gigabit. So you're going to see more and more conversations about gigabit. So, and that's what we're talking about on this webinar today. Conservative estimates place the physical infrastructure of the network to 20 to 35 years. My own personal observation is that it should last beyond 50 at least. The third, final concept that we want to look at is that when we build a fiber network, we want to build it so that it will be able to handle today's electronics, the access electronics, and a transition between those current electronics and the next. When we start looking at next generation application support for these networks, we're looking at cloud, data centers, telehealth, telemedicine. These are things that a lot of people are already talking about, even in your own arenas and your own areas in your cities and municipalities. Machine-to-machine, intelligent devices, a thing called hot desking, backhaul. If I talk about some of these things and you don't understand them, you'll be able to go back when you look at the slides and just pull it up on the internet. The internet is a great thing to look at. Smart grid, Internet of Things, SDN is software-defined networks, and finally open access. We're looking at building networks that multiple providers can attach to that network. The municipalities don't want to be the telephone companies, they don't want to be the cable companies, but they want to have multiple carriers possibly get onto the network that they're building. Multiple devices, again, multiple platforms, service creation. Everybody has one or all of these devices. Plain old telephone today, the video, whether I'm going over the top or streaming, the laptops, tablets, PCs, mobile and smart devices. How many of these devices do we physically carry on our person at one time during the day? I have my tablet and my mini something or other. I have a mini device as well as my cell phone. So I'm typically 2 or 3 on my physical person. If you look at the list of things about being the presence and IP, and you'll see a lot of the IP-centric components that are in there. A lot of video, a lot of visual voicemail, things like this that you actually, especially when you're using the mobile and in a vehicle, you don't want to be using your mobile while you're driving. So there are other aspects that you're going to use. When I talk to the millennials, that first line there, what, when, where, and how, they want everything very quickly, and they want it now. For most of the general public, they want to be able to look at multiple screens for video and entertainment, phone calling, video calling, and messaging, etc. For me personally, I enjoy having a single identity, a single inbox or address box. The cross-functional devices that allow me to have multiple connection points, but I have a single point of presence for myself. This is what the current availability is for some of the solutions today. This is the copper or active components. Again, this just tells you that there is a lot of bandwidth, a lot of capacity in these devices that we're doing today, but you will see very little of the copper facilities that will go to a gigabit. You don't even see that in this slide at all. The Metro Ethernet technology today, we still call it Metro Ethernet. For me, it's an Ethernet protected switched ring, and we're typically using this for our redundant backhaul backbone paths. These devices also have a fiber to the home interface port. Some of the disadvantages of this, because it's IP, it will not support some analog features like video, simply because of the frequencies that we're using, the wavelengths. Also, some of the SFPs, the small form factor transceivers, the transceivers of the receivers and lasers can be expensive on some of these devices. For PON architecture, we're still looking at passive optical networking. Here's what GPON, NGPON, point-to-point technology will do today. We know that GPON and NGPON are very similar, except in the bandwidth. WDM PON will get us up to the gigabit. The advantages are that the analog video is supported. Additional split ratios are supported, so I can take a single fiber and go 1 to 8, 1 to 16, 1 to 32, 1 to 64. So a single fiber might even be able to support up to 64 end users. The primary disadvantage is that we're using a shared bandwidth. When we look at that thing called WDM PON, we have separate frequencies or separate wavelengths. the cost for those devices are still fairly high. So that's one of the other disadvantages. We see a lot of Ethernet in the first mile or point-to-point technology, and this is where we start to see open access networks and what they're doing today to provide a full gigabit. It's an all IP format, and again, up to 1 gigabit speed. For me as an outside plant engineer, I know that the key disadvantage for me is extensive fiber is needed in the outside plant as well as in the central office. If it's a small serving area, I might be able to do point-to-point in smaller segments. And it just depends on how we design it. Access architectures. Today, this is what you see in an access architecture. If you look to the right there, that is the access architecture. The right of that device in the center called a POI, P-O-I, is a point of interconnect. Charlie's pointing. Sorry. Sorry about that, Charlie. This device right here, okay, this is the point of interconnect, and again, it is the interface to the core networks themselves. Sorry about putting that big mark up there. To the right of it is the access network itself. And again, you see multiple components: active Ethernet, VDSL, Ethernet in the first mile, WDM PON, NG PON, etc. The primary thing is that it's fed by fiber. You see that in a great deal. The DSL and those components, we're still feeding it with fiber, okay, and then we'll have a copper interface. This allows us to get out there very quickly. But again, when we go to VDSL, we're actually pushing that VDSL box closer to the subscriber, closer to the home. So my conclusion slide here is quite simply, how can we guarantee that the network design that we're doing is the correct design? Again, the three bottoms are very easy to understand. That understand this kind of customers that we have, the service that we're providing for today, but more importantly, what are we going to be using these services for tomorrow? We know that things like telemedicine is just around the corner. It's in a lot of areas today where we're doing remote locations where we don't have a doctor, but we may have a clinician that is out there that's tied directly to a medical clinic of some type. And then we want to understand the growth, the timeline for growth and scalability. So, and then there's certain aspects that we can control. As engineers, we know that we design and build using methods and procedures that provide a way of benchmarking. We've learned a great deal over the past 15 years on how to build these networks. We know what pitfalls, we know our pains, we know what works and what does not work. So rely very heavily on some of the network engineering groups that you're going to meet with and talk with. And for the vendors that are selling this gear, the electronics or the passive components, we know that they've taken some of the responsibility of the design out of the hands of engineers just by using new techniques and new methods. Things like connectorization in the outside plant. So there's no splicing. So I can do a thing called what we call plug and play. So with that, I'll turn this back over to Bill. And William?
Yes. Hi. Thanks, Pat. Thanks very much. That's a lot of good information in a short period of time. I'm sure some people's heads are spinning with the technology, but that's kind of what you get into when there's dealing with these technical issues. So I appreciate that, Pat. Our next speaker, and we'll get the questions at the end, and we'll have time for that. So our next speaker is Steve Howard, and Steve is the Information and Tech Development Manager for Paul Bunyan Communications out of Bemidji. They've made big news here recently with the plan to deploy gigabit fiber to the home services over a 5,000 square mile area of northern Minnesota. And so it's one thing I appreciate with Steve. I've called him many times, and many communities are looking to improve their broadband services, and Steve's always ready to go out and meet with them, and I think he gives some good straight answers, and the communities are better informed and know what they're up against when they after meeting with Steve. So Steve, thanks for that, and thank you for today, and welcome to the webinar.
Thank you, Bill. I appreciate it. As Bill mentioned, I'm the Information Technology and Development Manager here at Blandin Communications. And, my team and I develop, we do IT internally, and then we do development. In this case, development refers to our expansion plans, business cases, and things like that to enter new communities and to upgrade our facilities and services that we provide to our customers. I'll give you a quick overview on things. Blandin Communications is a member-owned cooperative. We've been in business for about 60 years, and we are governed by an 8-member board of directors. And it's kind of amazing to me, the people that formed this cooperative 60 years ago got together because they couldn't get telephone service, and they felt it was important. It was a critical thing that they needed. And the original directors had to mortgage their family farms to guarantee the loans to form the cooperative because everybody said it wouldn't work. The experts said it, the businessmen said it, the government people said it wouldn't work. Well, they went out there and jeopardized their farms, their livelihood for create this. And how many people do you know these days that are willing to do that? Do you know any? Me neither. But it's really pretty amazing. And anyways, we have since grown quite a bit, and we have been, as I mentioned, in the telephone business for over 60 years. We've been an internet provider for over 20 years. We've been a video provider for just under 15 years. And we've been providing for fiber to the home since 2004, so for just a little over 10 years. People often forget that. We think of fiber to the home as a new service that is just coming around. Well, the reality is we've been doing it for a while. And the reality is in 2004, it really was not ready for prime time. We were bleeding edge in those days, and it was some tough technology and in those days. And the initial equipment actually was so tough that we replaced it and moved on to better stuff. And nowadays it's tried and true and works really well. Moving on, here's kind of this might have been one of our initial pieces of our switching network in the early 1950s. Time went on. And, of course, technology moved ahead. We went to things like dial phones and private lines, no party lines. And as Bill mentioned, we recently announced the GigaZone, which is Paul Bunyan's Gigabit internet offering. And as Bill mentioned, it covers, we are covering 5,000 square miles. And the reality is you could get Gigabit internet anywhere in Minnesota today if you had a big enough checkbook. With enough millions, a fiber could go anywhere. The thing that makes this really special is that GigaZone is cost effective. I mean, $60 for 250 meg symmetric is a heck of a deal, as is $100 a month for full gigabit. Again, symmetric, no rate caps. It's pretty special, pretty much unheard of, especially in an area of this size. And let me zip up here. And here is a map showing our service territory. And again, it's about 5,000 square miles. And to put this into perspective, if you think about all this Google fiber that's gotten all the attention, you think about their first area of St. Louis, I think theirs was around 130 square miles. And St. Louis has a population density of over 5,000 people per square mile. And here we are in northern Minnesota serving over 5,000 square miles. And the population density ranges from 16 to 32 at the most people per square mile. The areas we cover are Cass County, Beltrami County, Hubbard, Itasca, Koochiching, and portions of St. Louis counties. I want to talk a little bit about some of the factors that kind of came into play as we went through the decision on how to roll this out and why and what things did we consider. Because it is a big deal, and it's certainly something new, and a lot of our peers think we're just plain crazy for doing this. Because it's a risk, but we think it's a good decision, and I want to talk about that a little bit today. As we looked at the factors in our decision, fiber network was the key thing, and without fiber network, you couldn't do it. As Pat mentioned, really fiber is the way to go. We've been installing fiber for well, many, many years, but fiber to the home for approximately 12 years. And even though we floundered a bit at first due to technology that really wasn't there many years ago, we knew that fiber was the answer, even if the electronics weren't ready for prime time. And so we stuck with it, and now that's paid off. We have a fiber network that can support it, and within 3 to 4 years, we'll have that extended through our entire service territory. One of the other things that came to mind was our infrastructure elements, or electronics, excuse me. Just because you have fiber to somebody's home doesn't mean it can do anything. Obviously it takes electronics at the endpoints and a network to support it, and that requires a lot of routers and switching and DWDM and other electronic gear. And that's expensive, and it seems like it always needs an upgrade. And that's something that we discussed at length to determine whether this was going to be a viable option. And as Pat mentioned, electronics sometimes is considered to last 3 to 5 years. Well, we are not interested in a 3 to 5 year solution. We want something that's going to last at least 10 in our electronics. We depreciate our electronics in people's homes and in our networks generally over a 10-year lifespan, and we want it to be there. And one of the ways to do that, of course, is maybe you spend a little bit more now in the initial stage, and you end up with a gigabit network that will last for several years. That's our hope, and that's our plan. Next item is the next factor in this cost that we considered with GigaZone is internet transit cost and transport cost. And this one's a biggie for the providers out there that are thinking about going into internet or gigabit. This is the one that probably causes the most stress and grief. And this is the one when we started talking about it caused me the most stress until I really sat down and thought about it. Internet transit is the cost that an internet provider pays to get to the outside world. And we are, like most other providers, have multiple connections. We get most of our traffic via Minneapolis. And in Minneapolis, an internet provider buying wholesale internet is probably going to pay somewhere between 50 cents a meg and maybe up to $5 a meg, depending on the quality and the term, the commitments, a lot of factors. But I think it's a ballpark average from the providers I've worked with. I suspect that they pay about $2, maybe $3 a meg for internet transit. And again, transit is going from providing connectivity across somebody's network to somewhere else. It's basically a connection giving your traffic to you. The other component of that is transport cost, and that depends upon where you are. That is you may be able to get internet for $2 a meg in, say, Minneapolis. You can't get it for $2 a meg in Grand Rapids or International Falls or Blue Earth or wherever, because you have the big cost is getting it from the big cities out to the rural areas. And in our case, our transport cost is probably greater than our transit costs, meaning it costs us more to get the bandwidth, the traffic from Minneapolis to us than it does to buy the traffic. And that's not uncommon. And that's just kind of part of our industry, but it's one of those things that causes providers to be afraid, I think, to go into gigabit networks, because if you look at it and you say, okay, cost per provided meg of service is maybe $2 a meg, and again, I'm just using round numbers, $2 a meg for transit, $2 a meg for transport, so it runs maybe $4 a meg. And then you think about, well, you're selling gigabit. If a customer uses gigabit, a full gig, they can cost you $4,000 a month. Well, that's the reality. But your revenue is only $100 a month. And that's the reality that a company like Paul Bunyan is looking at. And when you first look at those kind of equations, you go, ooh, this isn't good. This is the fast track to Chapter 11. That's the last place we want to be. We're not serving our members if we're making financially irresponsible decisions. So these are things we're looking at, and we looked at it before we rolled this out to decide and make sure this was the right plan. And as we thought it through, there are other factors that came into the mix. Could we lose $3,900 on a customer? Yeah, we could. Is it likely to happen? Probably not. One of the key factors there is traffic patterns. Today, what do you think most internet providers are providing? It's video. Netflix, Google, YouTube, and Amazon, and there's, of course, many others out there also. But that's the majority of an internet provider's traffic. At least it is for us. And people watching video really aren't using a gig. They're using a few meg for an HD stream these days, which is pretty nice. And the other thing about those traffic patterns, or the video traffic, is that you can potentially get that other ways. For example, in in Minneapolis, we have the MICE Exchange, the Midwest Internet Cooperative Exchange, which is an internet exchange that was formed by Paul Blandin and Mankato Networks, and then lots of other players joined in. And it is now the second largest nonprofit internet exchange in the United States. And it's located in Minneapolis. Google, Netflix is there, YouTube, Akamai, Hurricane, the list goes on and on. Apple's indicated that they are likely to be there in 2015. And what's significant about that is that a provider can connect to the MICE Exchange and get a lot of their traffic at no cost, well, no transit cost. And that helps to make projects like the GigaZone, more palatable. And it's something that people can think about if they're considering that. If other providers can think about if they're looking into moving to Gigabit. The other thing that we think about with this is growth rate. Device and technology limitations. How many people really can use a full gig? Realistically, if you buy a gig service today, are you going to be able to use it? Most devices in people's homes today cannot support a gig, and we're seeing that. Your tablet sure can't do a gig, and that's what most people are using tablets and wireless devices and things like that. So most computers cannot do sustained gigs. Sure, they might have a gigabit port and can do it for brief intervals, but most people really can't use it with the equipment they have. And we've learned already that there's one category of consumer that usually can, and we've discovered already that our gamers out there tend to have the computers that are pretty robust and actually can sustain full gigabit traffic. And we've got a few out there that give us a run for our money. So that's okay. Next couple of things we talked about in developing our GigaZone was, what's our growth rate going to be? How fast is this thing going to take off? And we have an advantage here that it will grow slow because we have to go to people's homes and install things. We have to take out their old equipment, put in new, and upgrade things to their homes. And we have a limited number of technicians. So this will be a steady growth curve instead of a crazy, flip a switch overnight thing. And that was just yet another thing to make us be more comfortable with offering this. Another factor in our decisions was the depreciation of our existing systems. If you put in an electronic system and you depreciate it over a 10-year life, and you're only 2 or 3 years into it, and then you abandon it, what happens to the old system? Well, are you going to take a loss of that against that system? Those are the things that work maybe against it a little bit. In our case, since we've been doing fiber to the home for so long, the older systems are getting very close to $0 of book value, so it's good timing for us. And these are things that I've talked about. They're all kind of measurable in dollars. But there's other factors that, we're intangible. They're kind of hard to put dollar costs on. I want to talk about those a little bit. The one thing for us is the benefit to our members. We are cooperative. We are here to serve our members. And offering Gigabit is a huge benefit to our members. Some will never know the benefits. Some people will move into our area and be able to do telecommuting and such, and we'll never know about it. We also know that economic development comes into play, and this is an attractive thing to businesses coming to the area. We're certainly seeing that already since our announcement, and it's another thing that benefits our members. So with economic development, our communities do better, our members do better, and it's a good thing for everybody. And we know that we are helping our communities by doing this. And third thing, there's competitive pressures. Another thing that you can't put a dollar amount on, but it has value. In this case, competitive pressures, what I'm referring to is the pressures from our competitors, but also the pressures that we put on other telecommunications providers, other internet providers. When we are offering a gig in a big area, the neighboring companies are hearing the pressure, and we hope they offer it. We hope their customers go to them and say, hey, why aren't you doing gig? I can get it over from Paul Blandin. They're out in the sticks, and I have neighbors down the road that can get it. Why can't I? And we want that to happen because we know that we're not an economic island. We are part of a community, part of a region in the state, and we want everybody to do well. And it'll be better for everybody. The place, of course, better states, their businesses will do better, their communities will do better, and some of that business will rub off on us and our communities as people shop here and the like, and that's good for everybody. So we recognize that there is a value in the competitive pressures that we place on companies. Additionally, there's PR value. By going forward with our GigaZone, of course, we get the technology we have deployed gets noticed, and the company reputation is improved. and it helps to benefit the company. And there's our summary. The Gigazone, is one of the largest gigabit networks in the country, and that is truly, at this point, we don't know of anything larger. Our options, again, are 250, 500, and 1,000 megabits for $60, $80, and $100. And, of course, that gets you to gigabit. You notice there's a little space underneath where it says gigabit. That's because we're talking about gigabit like it's the latest and greatest, which it is. But we know there's going to be something to fill into this box. There's going to be new technology coming up here soon. And we just don't know what it is, but we'll be ready for it when it comes. I want to thank everybody for your time today. If you have any questions, please feel free to enter them in the chat box. Pass it back to you, Bill. Thanks.
Thank you, Steve. That's so great, and congratulations to you guys for that. And then our third speaker today is Aaron Deacon.
Thanks, Bill.
He's Managing Director of So I'm hearing some voices there. Aaron Deacon is Managing Director of the KC Digital Drive. And, Kansas City is a big metro area, and a lot of times we focus on bringing models of smaller communities for you to emulate. But in this, I think it's important to listen for the model that they use in Kansas City and then apply that to your own community in your own region. So, without further ado, Aaron, welcome.
Thank you, Bill. Am I coming through okay?
Yes.
Good. Okay. As Bill mentioned, we've got, or what I'm going to talk a little bit about today is much more the social and community-oriented side of kind of how we deal with the network being here as opposed to the technology piece. KC Digital Drive is a nonprofit that started in Kansas City after Google Fiber announced that they were going to build out here, but before they actually started building anything or really told us what it was they were going to build. So that was actually kind of a long period where we didn't really know, and I got involved. My initial involvement with this was really at a purely community level. I was a member of the Social Media Club Kansas City, which was pretty interested in the topic, and so we started doing a lot of kind of ideation work and community engagement work around what's it going to be like when we have gigabit internet here, and why should people care about this. That then translated into a mayor's task force appointment and a more sort of government-led look at some of the same questions. A playbook came out, and this became a template here in Kansas City, really across two communities of Kansas City, Kansas, and Kansas City, Missouri, and extending to the rest of the suburbs as well, about what do we do with with gigabit internet to make it successful. And one of the two overarching principles was that the whole project was really about 90% sociology and only 10% about the technology. And the second one was that we didn't even have to worry about the technology, which was certainly a luxury here in terms of having someone like Google come in to build the network out. But it really let us focus on what kind of community do we want. So this document came out in the summer of 2012, and over the past 2.5 years, our brand and organization has evolved really more broadly around how we think about technology solutions to improve the community that we live in. When you start to talk to educators or healthcare workers or government employees or citizens, they don't really care that much about gigabit. And so it's up to us to kind of care about gigabit because we have some unique infrastructure, but we really like to frame it in a much broader technology context because everyone, or almost everyone, has this sense that there's a lot of promise in all this next generation technology and the latest and greatest and whatever's coming out, but it's really hard for people to keep up with and to get their heads around. So we try to broker some of those opportunities. And we work really in 4 key areas, or 4 sort of strategic areas, one of which is around digital inclusion and making sure that we have broad access in the community. The second is around economic development. The third is is more practically around how do we use a gig? What do we do that's going to actually make a difference? And the fourth is working with other cities, gigabit cities, smart cities, about 10 different names for these kinds of cities that are thinking about collaboration and technology in new ways, and we wanted to be a leader in that community. So I'll run through just a few of the things that we've done sort of out of this, or out of these four areas over the last few years, so you can get a sense of kind of where we've been, and then I'll talk in closing a little bit about sort of how we operate and how we get there. So one of the things, we had something called fiberhood rallies here. Google in their rollout said that they would only go to neighborhoods that expressed demand, but they set the threshold for sort of expressing demand pretty low and pretty accessible. It required a lot of work, but we actually had to get out in communities, and the cynical point of view would be to say to go do Google's marketing for them. The less cynical view would be to actually educate people who sort of surprisingly didn't understand why they should even care about having the internet. So even though we were doing some marketing, I suppose, it turns out the conversations were really important, and it was pretty eye-opening to see how many people didn't just say I can't afford it, but said why do I even want it, and to be able to start the conversation about all of the opportunities that being online can open up for you was really substantive. That work has translated into a much bigger regional approach to thinking about digital inclusion. So we now have a large coalition of entities, including the library, nonprofit organizations, city governments, actually several library systems, an array of nonprofits, the housing authority, who are thinking about how do we tackle the digital divide in a more holistic way. We held our first regional digital inclusion summit last fall. We've developed a strategic plan for the region, and the city of Kansas City, Missouri specifically, is now looking at passing a resolution this council session about potentially allocating city resources or assigning city staff, or just thinking about how the city actually gets behind this from a government perspective. The housing authority, as I said, is involved, and they're looking at bringing better Wi-Fi and connectivity solutions to public housing projects. So all of this visibility around the need to cross the digital divide has really been catalyzed by starting to talk about gigabit, even though it's really sort of two issues. There's sort of a high end. Okay, we've got world-class fiber. What do you do with that? But at the low end, how do you bring people online for the first time? So that's been one pretty cool area of activity. From an economic development perspective and sort of thinking about economic opportunity, there are a couple ways to think about that, and they really track with those two different dimensions I just mentioned. So one sort of at the high end, the sort of tech startups and technology entrepreneurship, coming up with new apps and new companies that can make money off the next generation of the internet, leveraging a lot of those things like cloud computing, network function virtualization, and that whole list we saw in the first presentation, but also from a sort of divine perspective, when you have people getting online for the first time and just being able to do things like fill out an online job application, that's another and critical way of thinking about how you boost your local economy. We've seen the city embrace this through their Launch KC initiative. So this is a city initiative that was incorporating some of this stuff into economic development policies. We had a play in the playbook about establishing a proof of concept lab, and we've gotten some funding from a federal grant, the I-6 challenge, through the I think it's Department of Commerce EDA, that put some money up to fund some very early stage concept development. And then we've really seen the entrepreneurial community take root and coalesce around some of these opportunities as well. So there's something called the Kansas City Startup Village, which clustered organically in the first neighborhood that actually got Google Fiber. So we've seen a lot of different activity in terms of economic development. We've seen some things in really around the gigabit piece, and that has had to be something we've really had to drive. I think that'll change a little bit. We started this 3 years ago, and there were a lot more questions about what does it mean to have a gigabit? Why do you need this? I think people are understanding that better, especially technically minded people. But we've continued to do sort of hackathons and developer-oriented events. We started something called 1 Billion Bits, which was really a community building and networking event for developers, trying to bring together the software people who really are trying to design things that don't need a gigabit or don't need fiber because they want everyone to be able to use it on their phones, with the network people who really understand things like software-defined networking and other kind of higher-end concepts from a network level. We work nationally with US Ignite, I know has a presence in Red Wing, Minnesota, Mozilla, and helped bring in a Gigabit Community Fund, which has brought $150,000 to fund early-stage innovation projects in education around Gigabit. And through that process, really our model has been to try to really bring disparate groups together and seed particular projects. So a few of these that have come kind of out of this whole holistic process are the software lending library, which allows you to basically use remote desktop over Gigabit to check out software. We have a company called Planet Impact that won one of our hackathons and got some early stage funding from US Ignite. They're actually in DC today at something called the Global Cities Challenge, which is an Internet of Things sort of project development. It's not quite a competition, but it's sponsored by US Ignite and NIST, the National Institute of Science and Technology, and they're raising early stage funding right now. There's another company called Talk to Me, which is a telehealth counseling operation that came out of one of the hackathons and then got accepted into the Digital Sandbox, which gave them some proof of concept funding. And I mention all these things for a couple of reasons. One, because there was a lot of intentionality around bringing the right groups of people together and sort of presenting the opportunities that we saw out there for gigabit networks. And two, they've been touched by a lot of different parts of sort of the playbook. So Talk to Me meets with our healthcare team. We identified a lot of the players through sort of regular healthcare meetings. Then they participated in a hackathon. They got introduced to US Ignite. They were able to get digital sandboxing. So all these different touch points of our work kind of come together in some of these companies or initiatives. And then finally the Gigabit City Summit, which we held here in January, and we're able to have a lot of the other gigabit cities around the country come and start working through some of these issues of what do you do next. A lot of people out there that talk about how you build the networks, but the how do you make sure it has impact on your community question is what our specialty is. But also, I guess this is kind of the key message here is something that's really important to think about because it doesn't just happen on its own. We've got sort of 6 key areas of impact that we work in, and this goes across sort of those 4 strategies. It's education, healthcare, government, economic development, digital inclusion, and gigabit apps. And I know we've only got about 8 minutes left, so I'm going to wrap up real quickly and not go into all of these. There's only 4 slides left, but I do want to talk just about sort of what we do in these areas to kind of make stuff happen, because we're very lean. We have a staff of 2 people, and the second one of us was hired last July, so I've been working on this for about 3 years. We're very much a networking organization, and we act sort of like I like to say act sort of like venture capitalists, but without the capital, or at least without the financial capital. But we really like to survey the landscape for the opportunities in the areas that we care about and find people that we think have a chance of really doing a successful project. And so sort of pilot projects rather than companies are what we invest in, and we invest our time, we invest community resources and network opportunities to try to make good things happen in the community. We do that through community building, hosting events that people can start to build that community around and that serve as mileposts in sort of building the projects. And then we also try to provide some of the backbone, because you'll find places where there is community energy, but maybe not the ability to actually manage a project. Sometimes it's just not the confidence to kind of think that they have the right to do a project. There's some people who just look for some external validation in order to take an idea and run with it. And we try to provide that, really kind of identify where they need help and see what we can do when there's a promising project. I will stop there, and I know there's probably a lot of questions for any of the three of us.
Thank you very much, Aaron. And your digital Gigabit Summit there was fabulous. I really had a good time at that conference and met a lot of very interesting people. So that was a lot of fun. Congratulations on that. Steve Howard, there's a question from Diane Wells about economic development and maybe a little more detail on the things that you've seen happening there in your area.
Okay, thanks, Diane. I started to answer your question in the chat box because I wasn't sure how much time we'd have. Since we announced the gig zone, we've had 3 businesses that have contacted our economic development staff or authority from outside the area, potentially looking at Bemidji as a place to locate their business, and that where it's come up that the Gigazone was something they needed more information on and wanted to hear about what we had to offer and our technologies. At this point, I don't know that we have a way to measure the economic development that is brought in and what it really will bring in. I think it'll take a little more time before we can get a handle on it, but I'm sure it comes into the equation for these companies.
One of the things that maybe Aaron could talk a little bit more about the startup village. That was really fascinating to see that. The real just visible transformation of an area with these pretty cool flags where all the startup businesses put outside their houses. Aaron, do you want to fill in a little more?
Yeah, right on state line between Kansas City, Missouri, and Kansas City, Kansas, they actually abut each other in a way that would not be recognizable if you didn't know that it was a state line. So a lot of people actually, when they were here for the conference, were excited. They're like, "Oh, I can just walk across the street and I'll be in Kansas or Missouri." This was the first neighborhood that Google started building fiber in. There was one guy, a developer and an entrepreneur, who was so excited and really wanted to open up the opportunity for other people to get on gigabit internet that he bought a house. He cashed in an IRA, and the housing in this neighborhood was pretty cheap. And he said that if you had a good idea and you submitted it to a form he put on homesforhackers.com, then he would give you 3 months fee in the house, basically, to play on fiber. And then he put up a room on Airbnb also. So he started to get people just coming through his house. Just guys decided to do something a little bit nuts, but really powerful, and a great guy. And turned out there was another person 2 doors down from him who had inherited a home, but didn't want to live in it and opened it up. He actually rented it to 3 different startup companies. So there were all of a sudden 4 startup kind of houses, companies within a couple blocks, or on the same block, really within like 2 houses of each other. They found a couple other people in that area and really decided to take that sort of accidental proximity and use it to build community. So over the past couple of years, more people have bought houses specifically to put startup businesses in them. There are probably 8 or 10 total, maybe 30 businesses, and you've just seen a really neat startup technology community develop. And some of those companies have grown and moved out, and others have moved in. But it's been a really nice symbol of the organic entrepreneurial power of the internet.
the standard rural Minnesota town of 5,000 people, is there a clear technology fiber to the home choice of whether it's GPON or whatever to use that, or is each place unique, and is there a variety of technologies that you would use in any given town?
Okay. When you look at a small community of 5,000 inhabitants, how many homes do you have in that area? And more importantly, how many homes per square mile? A lot of companies tell me that if I try to build out, and these are the carriers, they'll come in and say, it's just not economically sane for me to build to all of these different areas because I've got 10 homes per square mile or 5 homes per square mile. So it's not cost effective. 2 ways that we're doing this, we're looking at splitting techniques where we have a single fiber that goes out and may only feed 4, 6, 8 homes. So the other aspect of that is a point-to-point architecture, and I like to push the point-to-point architecture with possibly multiple fibers so multiple service providers can go to the customer. And when we look at things called monopolies and duopolies, so we typically have one carrier that feeds that network. The other aspect is the smaller communities, they do not have the resources that provide installation of the network to the home, so they need companies that are going to service it. So that's what we're looking at today. When they build the network, who are we partnering with to build the network? And then second is, who are we partnering to manage the network?
Okay. Do you have any reaction to that as someone who's building both in cities and in the rural countryside?
Well, not exactly. Certainly, from a technology standpoint, I would agree. We're using active Ethernet and we're using PON technology because you can't put hundreds and hundreds of fibers great distances economically in these real rural areas. So certainly I would concur with that.
Okay. Well, I'm going to tell people that I was driving through your territory yesterday up by Red Lake and then down to Grand Rapids, and so you can see certainly the challenge of that population area to provide the fiber to the home is an unbelievable investment and commitment to the region.
It's pretty rural, but it's gorgeous.
Yeah, it is, and I don't see any other questions, and we're kind of right up against the time. So I just want to thank the speakers who committed to participate today and share their information, and then I'll turn it over to Mary to close it up.
Well, thank you, Bill, Pat, Steve, and Aaron for joining us on the webinar today. Our next webinar will be Thursday, March 12th from 3 to 4 p.m., and the topic is wireless broadband. It's complicated. Thanks, everyone, for attending, and have a great rest of your day.
See you guys.